Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And thank you for taking such a short tea break. So I want to begin the final panel of the day, of the first day of the conference. The panel is titled Climate Adaptation and the Struggle for Sustenance. And we have three really exciting presenters today. Two of them are in person, and the third will be an online presentation. So what I'm going to do is just introduce each one as they speak. So I'll begin. The first presentation is Tayeba Batool from the University of Pennsylvania. And her talk is titled Examining the Urban Ecologist as Political Figure of Climate Change in Pakistan. Welcome, Tayeba.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the Dr. Fagel and Professor Adaptation and the government for the panel and all this enlightening conversation so far. And I look, the title of my presentation is Examining the Urban Ecologist as a Political Figure of Climate Change. And here I want to look at this idea of the theme of the conference, Lives of Instability in an era of anthropogenic climate change, and examine the types of claims that are made upon expertise and the lives that are responsible in the aftermath. I'll start with a short story. Today, sorry, it's not working. There. Oops. Sorry. There we go. Great. Okay, so today, Naz's farmhouse is among the several hundred residences that populate Islamabad's expanding real estate. This neighborhood is dotted with plant nurseries that have capitalized on the former agricultural soils and water supply from a dam that is within the city limits, a government agricultural research facility spread over this area, that was built 40 years ago lies along the major road that leads into Naz's neighborhood. A few turns on this road branch off towards some of the middle and upper middle income class private housing societies. And while some residences like Naz's reserve most of their land towards growing vegetables or grains or creating space for chickens and goats, others are invested in maintaining lawns of Korean grass and exotic palms that join the grander style of rich bungalows. Houses owned by upper middle class and elite residents sit within walking distance of Islamabad's few remaining villages and newly emerging informal settlements. And in contrast to other houses in the neighborhood, Naz's house is still a single-story, modestly built abode. So what we have here is a picture of Islamabad and Rawalpindi, the third largest metropolitan space in Pakistan that is rapidly urbanizing. And what you see here is a part of a city that has both this very dense urban cores surrounded by agricultural soils and lands, and the sort of transformations that are happening over time, bringing us to the question that will come back in a second. So why is Naz important to the story? I was introduced to Naz through Pak Burmese. It's a social group of middle and upper middle income class middle and upper middle income residents who are mostly 50 and above. And they were enthusiastic about looking at natural methods to cultivate vegetables, fruits, trees, flowers, sometimes on their rooftops and other times in large plots of lands. Members coordinated meetups to share tips, practice, and produce, and exchanged online resources and photos over WhatsApp. So before I had met Naz, I had already talked together with other members of the group to ask and understand how they practiced and experimented with different ecological methods of cultivating nature in Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So some of these examples included making a Miyawaki urban forest, which is like really dense assemblage, and a new trend around thinking of sustainable and urban environments. There's ways of like growing vegetables on roofs. There's like gardening kits. And there are different techniques that people would come together to share knowledge over. In my broader dissertation research, I try to I'm tracing the social and ecological lives of these urban forests and tree plantings as they're mediated by experts, policymakers, and practitioners around urban nature. I was led to NAS. I was led to residents like NAS once I realized that the object of my study, the urban forest, and the various natures around them, are also a locus of attention for non-experts and a growing number of residents who are seeking to live life more naturally in the wake of climate change. By non-experts, I mean that this was not a group of people who had received formal education or employment in the agricultural sciences, horticultural degrees, landscaping, or the various type of sciences, and not all of them were dedicated full-time to the pursuit of nature-based solutions or such interventions. I was curious to learn from this group of urban residents and how did they exactly perceive climate change and urbanization in their ecological practices of growing, cultivating, and experiencing urban nature. So coming back to Naz, Naz shared her journey of practicing permaculture. So the specific type of technique she was looking at was an approach to sustainable land management. So permaculture is this way of looking at land management through an ecosystem approach. There's zero interventions, there's zero additions of chemicals. It's supposed to really mimic the rhythms of the natural agricultural life. And you try to reserve water-based solutions. And one of the ways she was trying to do this was by transitioning a lot of the expansive garden spaces around her house to establish orchards, to keep chickens at home, and including a small maize field, which was the second picture up earlier. A little background about Naz. So Naz was born and raised in another part of the country in Karachi and had actually moved to this farmhouse in Islamabad to pursue a life more closely connected to nature after a cancer diagnosis. Her father had bought the land in 2006, almost 20 years ago, when the area was still considered an agricultural belt within the city. So when she moved now as a 56-year-old woman, 15 years later, there were substantially fewer agricultural fields around her home. Among other farmhouses like hers, commercial plazas, housing societies, and a continuously expanding road infrastructure had established a strong foothold that was emblematic of the urban sprawl. When Naz talked about her motivation to take on an ecological approach in working harmoniously with nature, she would also address that how did she arrive at this through the economic constraints in her life and the influence of her neighbor's experience in the decision. So when Naz had moved to Islamabad, she did not have a sustained financial income. So this is a late 50s single woman, and she had this big house. The house had a massive garden in a state of disrepair. After looking around in her neighborhood and asking various friends, she was drawn to thinking of what could a sustainable life look like, and that one of the ways was through food. So she would cultivate whole vegetables and fruits. Without the financial resources to bring in big tractors or huge machineries, and skeptical of expensive and chemical-based fertilizer, Naz started following park permits, a local group of citizens opting to use permaculture to optimize an available natural resource, reduce waste and toxins in their food chain, and create healthier ecosystems, which then eventually led her to setting up the farm. Naz's experience and motivation of converting part of her private space in response to environmental concerns can be joined by the efforts of several hundred others in the twin cities of Islamabad and Rawalpindi, where I was conducting my research. I held extensive interviews with at least 10 other residents who had taken on ecological practices, formally and informally, conversations with others during workshops and farm tours, and observed interactions and WhatsApp groups that were numbering over 200 members. The type of claims that this group of nature enthusiasts make is not about being an environmentalist or an activist, fighting against the government to address smog, water quality, food quality. But a lot of the ways that they would use the terms would be, I'm a self-taught farmer, self-motivated. And their places of unifying and organizing were also disparate. So sometimes there would be workshops at residence places, at the local university, and sometimes it would just be an exchange of resources and YouTube links online. Amidst these fragmented spaces, these residents were also shaping the space and contours of what it means to live in an already climatically and environmentally altered city. So the the title of this talk, when I think about the ecologist, looking back at what is the standard definition of an ecologist, these are some of the ones that come across most commonly, that an ecologist is a person who studies relationship between living things and their environment, someone who studies distributions, abundance, and interactions among organisms at different spatial scales, someone or a biologist who is studying plant community. But the individuals and communities that I was interacting with in my fieldwork evoked ecology, not for the sake of advancing some disciplinary expertise or as a use of creative assembly or activism. And in fact, like in one of the examples that I'll share, they would all often be like technically, like we may not know technically the biological names or the precise numbers that would qualify them as like the ecological expert. But what I want to gesture here is the way the practice of doing, enacting, and being attuned to the worlds around them produced an epistemic authenticity. And so what I argue frames them in this elusive figure of an ecologist, a type of an expert who is actively reshaping responses to environmental change and working against the intense efforts of urban heat island effects and abnormal rain patterns. These urban residents are looking at not as much to the sort of formal expertise espoused by the state, but really trying to think about what is the claim that they can make over their spaces and the materials around them to work towards addressing climate change. So, for example, one of the stories that Nas shared was that she had met up with the officer from the National Agricultural Research Center. So this is the state-instituted research facility. Quote, there was a man who was the director, and he also joined our Park Burmese group. I don't know what their remit is, but I visited the space. It's a big place. All they do is put on trainings, go abroad to get trainings. Nothing substantial. The guy doesn't know anything. Pleasant gentleman, but he doesn't know. And then one day he had a delegation coming in from Balochistan, which is another province in Pakistan. He got into a flap. What would he do with them? So he contacted me. I told him that technically I can't tell them. I don't know the biological names, nor do I know what temperature the mulch, what temperature the compost might be. So we just played it by ear, and they came and they went away quite delighted. So I asked, what was so delightful in this? They were visibly delighted that you're doing all the things that we read and learn about. I had the maggots in my compost and everything. So I was disappointed at the institute that these are the things that I've been reading off YouTube, and you were not even able to implement it in your circle of authority. So this is one of the gathering spaces for green waste and leaf mulch that Nas has on her plot. And what this incident really highlights was like how the practicality of looking at ecology was not just as much of knowing, but also of like practically embedding it and attuning it to the materials around you. In addition, this group like would share solutions to address the various extreme temperature variations. For example, in the increasing temperatures of the summer, one of the hacks that members had tested was to introduce tunnel farming, which is creating a canopy and allowing different types of vegetables to grow over through the canopy. And all of these were more successful than trying to just grow under even plastic canopies. So what she shared was that from what I understand, that going forward, I will need to make tunnels. There's no way without it. The Karela tunnel, the vegetable that she's referring to, is low cost. So I just put in a climber of vine. A lot can be done instead of putting in plastic, because I'm against plastic. And here again, she's evoking a cause of certainty of action by looking at, okay, so I can understand how nature is growing, how it's responding. And one of the interesting things is like, because they haven't been plucked, so they're actually getting yellow at this point, but sorry, and then. So just to bring it back to what sort of the situated example gives us to are three things that I want to draw attention towards. The first is really a knowing that is by enacting, embodying, and sharing. So these encounters and aspirations of cultivating and growing nature, whether arboreal or agricultural, rely not only bringing in experts, but developing an ecological attention to the work already being done by the humans, plants, and non-humans. And here I'm thinking a little bit with Colin and Evan's book on rethinking expertise, how expertise extends beyond the institutional credentials, encompasses experiences, it's practice-based and lay forms of knowledge. And what I want to add to that is also this like idea of inhabiting a city where conditions are constantly and always changing. The second is thinking through the question of the politics of urban development itself, where oftentimes development politics is situated, as Stone and Sanders talk about, as what is the most productive work of land that can be done. So in our discourse around urbanization, or even like blurring boundaries of urban and the rural, the city is seen as this growth machine. But what these spaces offer us is an alternate vision of what the growth is looking like in an era of taking development not through as state enacted, but through the aspirations that people are networking and sharing within themselves. And the last takeaway, or the last sort of conclusion I drew from my ethnographic observations and interviews, was this question of the urban expert, of like who really comes to what constitutes expertise is nested in the politics of thinking with really, I think this was a little bit of the question of the uncertainty of like living with the uncertainty of not having maybe enough financial resources, not knowing what the temperatures might look like, but always being invested to claim space that, okay, this is where we can make an intervention. Thank you, and I'll conclude there.
Thank you so much, Tayeba. I now welcome our second speaker, Brianna Hemphill. Brianna from Johns Hopkins University, and the title of her presentation today is Land, Food, and Freedom, the Struggle for Food Autonomy in Haiti and Georgia.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is the presentation up? I have it on. Yeah, it is. There it is. Hello. Okay, so this is my presentation on land, food, and freedom. I'm going to talk a little bit about Haiti and a little bit about Georgia and a lot about food autonomy and food sovereignty. There it is. Okay. I wanted to ground this presentation in this quote from Malcolm X because I think it really encompasses the thorough thread that I wanted to put through both of these situations. So this is revolution is based on land. Land is the basis for all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. There's a grassroots organization called the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And when they cry out, free the land, it is not an ask for some vague and powerful someone to free the land somewhere. It is a revolutionary directive. That is the concept, essentially, of self-determination. And the specific land that MXGM talks about when they say that is the Black Belt, known as South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia. So there's a long struggle for land in the Black Belt of the United States, going back from the formal end of chattel slavery to industrialization, and among other things that left African and Black farmers landless. The tension between growing food for profit, cash crops such as cotton and tobacco, and growing food for sustenance was slightly alleviated by certain informal structures like the slave sustenance farms they would keep for themselves. But as time moved on and the African turned from commodity to consumer, there were different tensions that had to be at play, different contradictions that arose within the struggle for land and food. This opened up a new terrain for exploitation and gave way for the current and later compounding crises to exacerbate the poverty and hunger of those on the margins. There it is. That brings us to the imperial mode of living. This is defined here by Erlich Brand and Marcus Wisson as the imperial mode of living links people's everyday life with the partly globalizing societal structures. It intends to make visible the social and ecological prerequisites of the dominant norms of production, distribution, and consumption, as well as the relations of power and neocolonial North-South relations of power and domination behind them. And it clarifies how domination is normalized in neocolonial North-South relations, consumption and production, to the point where these are no longer perceived as such. One of those prerequisites is the designation of the South as a political and geographic location of dispossession and exploitation. So a lot of what I kind of work on is this connection between South and South, US South and the global South as a encompassing geographic region of dispossession and an encompassing geographic region that is fighting the same battles on the same battlegrounds. So here, the normalization of North-South dominance is made legible through the creation of the South as a deprived geography. It is not a space marked by inattention, because on the contrary, the South is, the global North pays a lot of attention to the South, which is not, it's not positive attention. It's negatively attended to. So as the global South is the pocket purse and the pity of the global North, it is paid a lot of attention to, but that is because of the forces of exploitation. It is this designation, among others, that links the dark and dispossessed people of the South and South together, from Atlanta to Haiti. Success within the imperial mode of living depends on externalizing the costs of imperialist capitalism onto an other or an elsewhere. The South is that somewhere else. So if the cost of overconsumption, environmental exploitation, and imperial geopolitical struggles for power and profit and influence are externalized onto the global South, how then can the South exert itself? Well, the idea of self-sustaining agricultural sites is not new. It has been a core tenet of rural sustainability practices since the aforementioned end of chattel slavery. So this is not to present it as something that is unprecedented, but as a return to models of living with the earth as opposed to in dominance of it during unprecedented times. It is the assumed domination of the human living thing over plant, animal, soil, and water that perpetuates the imperial mode of living as preeminent. But as rains become more inconsistent, affecting the soil, as grocery prices rise, encouraged by corporate greed and manufactured scarcity, and geopolitical conflicts keep the world on the brink of imperial explosions of warfare that took place in entire towns, the land is as important as ever as both the thing that sustains us and the thing that we sustain. This necessitates a post-colonial ecology, a way of being and living in harmony with the earth. This is maybe down. So that brings us to the first case study here, which is alternative ways to be Atlanta. This research brought me to Georgia, to a community that decided to take daring steps toward food sovereignty. Community Movement Builders is an organization based out of Atlanta, and they have launched the Love, Land, and Liberation Project this past December. These are pictures of the farm. I'm not great at taking long-range pictures, but you can generally see what's happening here. So this is in Lithia, Georgia. They have 17 acres, about 20 minutes outside of Atlanta. And the farm launched in December, as I said, ahead of the current presidential inauguration, in the midst of the fight over Cop City in Atlanta. So the fight over Cop City, which is a fight on two fronts, because on one hand, is it a fight for the Atlanta forest. It's a fight against ecological devastation of the forest in order to place police training grounds onto those grounds. And it's a fight against the over-militarization of police in Atlanta in lieu of money for other things, infrastructure, and other things that would alleviate the suffering of people in Atlanta, especially the poor and working class. So against the backdrop of the fight for Cop City and the fight for the Atlanta forest, increased police budgets, the depletion of resources for infrastructure and education, pre-inauguration Atlanta was also marked as a space where organizers that were distributing food and collecting mutual aid were hit with racketeering charges, RICO charges, and domestic terrorism charges. All of that is a backdrop for the launch of this project. So the fight in Atlanta was always both an ecological and anti-war struggle against the prioritization of militarized police forcing over material needs and ecological salubrity. These compounding factors led to the launch of the farm, on which the farmers, they grow produce, they take care of chickens, goats, and bees, and they figure out how to work with the land as opposed to against it. I learned a lot when I was on this farm. I had no idea that you could buy a farm with the animals already on it. So they taught me that while I was there. But the farm expands over a few acres, and what they're doing with this farm is innovative because the head farmer actually used to work in tech. He was in Silicon Valley. So he's taking this kind of tech innovation, bringing it to the farm, and figuring out ways to take pre-existing modes of dealing with the earth and ecological structures and plants, and finding new ways to relate to those in order to make the farm as beneficial as possible and also as productive as it could be. So I went to this farm, as I said, it's a little bit outside of Atlanta, but the core of the farm, it used to be in Atlanta. They had a dispute with the city of Atlanta over the space that the farm originally occupied in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Atlanta. So if I say Pittsburgh, talking about Georgia. But the way that they run this farm is that they have a deal with a local Trader Joe's, which gives them a bunch of free food, fruits and vegetables, bread products, meats. They package them on the farm into about 40 grocery bags, and they can be packed up on that day, travel it all back to Atlanta to distribute it at a church, along with other things they do to alleviate people's suffering. They give away about $500 for utility bills. People can come there, first 10 people in line can get $500 off their bills paid. So when I walked around these grounds, lead farmer was telling me about what they were doing here. And he was telling me about plans to extend the farm and his motivations for being a part of the project, and his desire to return to more indigenous modes of land cultivation and crop growing, such as with corn. They have a bunch of chickens there, and he jokes that the current egg shortage did not really affect them because their chickens lay about 20 eggs a day. And I joked with him that whenever I have too many eggs and they're about to expire, I make a pound cake. Which if you bake, they take a lot of eggs. So this site is supposed to be self-sustaining in the sense that it inserts the human into the ecological process. So the way he's explaining it to me is that one of their strategies is aquaponics, in which they put the plants in water, they put fish in the water, they feed the fish discard the waste, the plants take the waste, which cleans the water for the fish. Then when the fish are grown, they can eat the fish and they can sell the fish, and the cycle continues. So they're trying to find ways in which to work with the land. Nothing is discarded. All hands are used for everything. They've got discarded cardboard boxes that they put above the soil so that they don't over-till the soil and exhaust it. So it keeps the moisture in the soil, but it also keeps them from exerting the soil. They rake leaves and then chop them up to put them back into the land. Any food that they get from the grocery store that cannot be given to the people is given to the compost and the worms to go back into the soil and nourish the land further. So they really decided to take the post-colonial and make it pre-colonial, as in taking the modes of resistance and making it a return. It's a reversion, it's Sankofa, reaching back to go and get it and bring it forward. That's the idea of this farm and the way that they're trying to live here. It's a model for how to reject the imperial mode of living, to stake claim to the land, to food and self-sustainability, because food is a necessity that's more than a right. Food is as much of a right to you as your arm has a right to your hand. Everyone has to eat. You have to eat, you have to have food. So the reason for this farm is to directly combat the imperial mode of living that says that land as a commodity, like everything else, is a factory that can be used and depleted so that people can't use it. Food is political because of the intersections of ownership, power, and dispossession. And to reject the imperial mode of living is to reject the assumptions of land ownership and the monopoly of markets and capital to the land. It also means to reject the isolationism of the global north and foster a pan-African, pan-Southern solidarity. While I was on the farm, the executive director told me that they used to fund a project in Haiti, which brings us to, if I can do it, Haiti. So Haiti is the crux of a lot of different compounding issues. It is the crux of forced dependence and Western vengeance, a little nation that has never been forgiven for shaking off French chains and asserting their sovereignty. It is the cornerstone and inspiration for anti-colonial liberation movements worldwide. The West has deemed this African nation a violent failed state, but Haiti's failure would be the West's victory, and Haiti will not allow that triumph. Haiti's peasants and farmer organizations have been fighting for the right to cultivate their own land and sustain themselves without the intrusion of missionaries, non-governmental organizations, and foreign governments bringing troops and munition along with their charity. The latest manifestation of this is the Massacre River Canal Project. Climate catastrophe, which has intensified in the global south, which leads to a lot of things, including migration, fleeing because they deem their land not being able to be lived on anymore, makes these lands inhabitable. So the previously fertile soil has been marked by inconsistent rains, which makes the soil a lot less fertile for plants. In response, Haitian farmers have dug their own canal, on the Massacre River in order to get water to irrigate their farmlands and be able to grow their own crops in defiance of Western dropping of subsidized rice into Haiti and other forms of imperialist aggression that undercuts the Haiti farmers' ability to sustain themselves. So the stakes are very clear for everyone in Haiti. Marie-Laurette Numa for Haiti Liberté writes that it will allow many Haitians to stay in Haiti to work and live off of their land, rather than go look for low-paying jobs on Dominican plantations. They will no longer need to shop for food in the town across the Massacre River. Every Monday and Friday currently, thousands of Haitians stream across the bridge, where they spend between $1.2 to $1.5 million a week. The clarity around the political implications of the project is clear because of the suppression of both the Haitian government and the Dominican Republic's government on them building this project. They've decided to take matters into their own hands and build it anyway. On Sundays, there's cultural performances and music. People bring food for the people that are working on the project. It's become a site of national pride, and it's become a site where people can affirm their right to food sovereignty and their land in a world that would tell them that they are reliant on the US and other Western backers to provide food for them. So with both of these projects, what's evident is the common theme that these conflicts are fought on the same battleground. The prioritization of militarized state forces and the deprioritization of the ecological sustainability of these places, the sustenance and dignity of the poor, led to these communities constructing their own spaces for self-determination to ensure their survival. These are examples of what Monica M. White calls prefigurative politics, ones rooted in alternative political systems. Each space is democratized and backed by the community it exists in, which can also be transformed into dual power. Instead of something imposed or gifted to the people by generous neo-colonial benefactors, these are spaces constructed by and with the community themselves and managed by the community. These spaces prioritize the symmetry of living with the earth, centering the living thing as opposed to the dominion of the human living thing, and expanding the designation of the living outside of just that which breathes into soil, into water, into plants, into air, into everything that encompasses life, into expanding what living is in order to make life sustainable for all people to be able to partake. And I thank you all for your time.
So much, Fiona. Now welcome.
Sorry.
You liked it so much.
I liked it so much. I took it with me.
All that uncertainty.
I got to the end though.
I now want to welcome our third speaker, Jamila Hamidou, who's from Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity of Germany. Jamila, thank you so much for joining us from afar. And the title of Jamila's talk is Making Sense of Climate Displacement in West Africa, Communities in Search of a Promised Land. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. It is indeed very late here in Germany. It's 11:25 p.m. So yeah, but thank you so much for this opportunity and this lovely panel. I've got a slide. Can I share it? Is it possible?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right, just bear with me. Right. So as our dear colleague just mentioned, my presentation is on the topic of making sense of climate displacement in West Africa, communities in search of a promised land. This presentation stems from a 9-month field work conducted in West Africa last year between December 2023 till October 2024. So it was an extensive ethnographic research in 5 West African countries, namely Ghana, La Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, Togo, the Gambia, and Togo. So today's presentation is just going to be on 3 countries. I wouldn't go through all of the 5 countries that I went to. So I would just look at how the people that I interviewed and the observations from the field and also early analysis show how individuals use terms and vernaculars and language to make sense of their displacement in the face of climate-induced form of migration. So I'll start off with a quick outline and climate displacement in Africa, a general context, and then I would look at Tamale. Tamale is a capital of northern Ghana, which is ironically a place which is quite dry and it's in the savannah zone, very close to Burkina Faso and the Sahel, but it's also a boom city. So that is the paradox, a place that is quite dry, quite not much going on in terms of vegetation, but it has become a boom city for people migrating up north. And then also looking at Ghanaian fishing communities going on aprodo as in going for a form of seeking a promised land, seeking something better outside of Ghana as a result of climate-induced form of displacement. Then I'll look at Abidjan. Abidjan is the capital of La Côte d'Ivoire, and Abidjan is known as Le Petit Paris. Sorry, guys, I have a very bad cold, so my voice is a bit rusty. And then the third aspect of my presentation will be climate-displaced West African women on the move. And this is to indicate how climate displacement is also an avenue of women gaining agency. And it's also a paradox in that sense. So quickly, a quick map. So these are the countries that I indicated. So Ghana, Togo, Senegal, La Côte d'Ivoire. Senegal is a bit further off, but so these are the places. So Tamale is up here in northern Ghana, and then you've got Accra, the capital of Ghana. So Accra is mainly on the Gulf of Guinea, and Accra is also a place with a lot of fishing communities and also Sekendi Tekradi. And these are the places that a lot of people migrate from to other countries such as Senegal, Togo, La Côte d'Ivoire in search of a promised land because the area has become highly polluted as a result of extensive pollution from the environment, but also from illegal mining, polluting water bodies, and also the soil around that area. So that has also pushed a lot of people to migrate. And yeah, so just to a quick recap. So studies and data on climate change and displacement in Africa over the past couple of decades has focused on mobility of populations being affected by both onset and fast onset of extreme weather events. These mobilities are both internal, cross-border, and international migration. Most of these studies show how much mobility takes away their agency, but without questioning how, in some cases, it gives them agency and in some form of empowerment and determining their movement through adaptation strategies and language they use to make sense of such mobility. There is also absence in or little data and literature on how climate, 1 second, please. Sorry, okay, all right. Sorry, I'm having a little problem with my screen. How do I get this down? Okay, I'm trying to make this small because this is disturbing me. I'm trying to, okay, there you go. Thank you. Right, so so there is also absence or little data and literature on how climate-stressed environments are places of new forms of migration destination. So these are just some of the visuals that demonstrate what is going on in the subcontinent. So you can see here with the dryness of the land, and that is all over West Africa and particularly within the Sahel region. And this is a picture that I took in Senegal in a town called Touba. Touba is the religious center for the Murid Muslim confrérie. And this was during the rainy season, and this was a flood. The whole place was highly flooded, and people could easily move. And this is in Ghana, in Accra, and an area called Agbabulushi, which has been dismantled now, and it used to be called the toxic city. Toxic because all of the Western toxic waste were actually sent to Ghana, and you can see. But this is actually a picture from the Congo, another part. So climate change, you can see on this map that Africa is basically the continent where displacement is the highest in terms of percentage, 3.5%, compared to other regions of the world. And projections are that it's going to be much higher within the next 30 years by 2050. So Africa is definitely vulnerable in terms of climate induced form of displacement. And as we can see on this map as well, we can also see how the changes of climate is becoming more and more severe on the Sahel, going towards North Africa and even to Southern Africa and part of East Africa. So it's something that is on the right. So according to the UNCHR, the first quarter of 2024, January to April, saw an increase of displacement from Central Sahel countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Chad. Over 3.3 million people are forcibly displaced due to relentless conflict exacerbated by worsening effects of climate crisis. But also the security situation in the Central Sahel is volatile, forcing people to flee their homes in search of safety and protection. Protection risks are also widespread. Survey data from the first quarter of 2024 also shows that forcibly displaced and host communities perceive theft, attacks on civilians, and gender-based violences are the key risk. Women and children are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. So the central question is that how does language and vernacular appropriation of African migration tells us about climate-induced migration and displacement? In other words, does it really change how we think about climate migration? So climate displaced migrants in La Côte d'Ivoire. So this is a map of northern Ghana, dry climatic zones and etc. Whereas in the south, we can see that it's much more greener and also the coastal area is much fertile. So Tamale, the boom city. In Ghana, migration from Tamale to the southern cities of Accra, such as Accra and Kumasi, has been on the rise for the past 20 years or more due to harsh climate extremes, extreme heat, extreme rainfall patterns. Many migrate to southern cities as seasonal migrants. Tamale in the past 10 years has become a boom city as many are moving to Tamale to seek greener pastures because of available land that are readily available land that are not available in southern cities. So Tamale paradoxically has become, because of the fact that people are moving out and there is the lands as available, but also Tamale is also a corridor of products coming from the Sahel into Ghana. So it's become a place where people are moving, and as a result of that, the locals are losing out in terms of backyard farming. And as we can see, displacements are also due to urban expansions and development. Locals are losing their lands and home to foreigners. So the new term that the locals use is foreigner. When they say you're a foreigner, it doesn't mean that you're coming from outside of the country or outside of the continent. Foreigners is to mean that somebody who's not a local. So that is a term that they use. And the term foreigner is also to indicate that you're coming with purchasing power. You're having more money than they have. And as a result of that, the locals are also feeling that it's a form of othering as well, that they're being priced out. And the term foreigner has become what is mainly used in this context in northern Ghana. So this is one of the people I interviewed, and he was indicating that he had to move from Tamale Central because the foreigners have come and taken the prime locations and lands around that, and he had to move to peri-urban areas to build his house. So these are fresh roofing zincs that you can see, and you can tell that these lands were formerly farming lands, and they've all been taken over by new settlements and the foreigners, as my respondent mentioned. And as we can see, how the new roofing sheets are becoming. So this is actually a peri-urban zone in close to Tamale. So you're seeing that more and more locals are now losing their lands to foreigners. And as a result of that, there's a bit of tension arising because the land is already dry. And on top of that, losing land is also not something that brings a lot of harmony in the neighborhood. And so we talk about people moving into Tamale. We're seeing Turkish communities, Chinese, Indian businesses. We're seeing British, American. So it's also quite interesting to see that these people are moving from Tamale to Accra, to other places, but even further afield to Europe, to Southern Africa, as Laurent mentioned in his presentation. But we're also seeing that these same places are also places that people are coming in. So it's a whole paradox of movement. So this is Tamale and peri-urban Tamale. So these are factories that are being built by foreigners, specifically Chinese. This was actually a Chinese mall that is being built, and a Chinese warehouse and factories that are being built, but also Indian businesses building rice farms, etc., and people being displaced as a result of that. So strategies of adaptation. Munzo Nemani in Hausa mean that we are here to seek. And that is a term that climate displaced migrants from the Sahel, from Niger and other places coming to Ghana. So these are a couple of Nigerians who have arrived in Ghana lately, especially the last 1 year or so, as a result of both climate-induced displacement, political instability, and terrorist insurgency has also brought a lot of Sahelian migrants to countries on the Gulf of Guinea, i.e. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Togo, etc. And the strategy that they use in the words of Munzo Nemani means that we are here to seek in all sorts of things, seek as begging, seek as being involved in petty trading, and these are some of the women in the market in Accra who are there to seek. So petty trading, such as selling fabrics or selling religious products that we can see with this young man. And also the community, the Hausa community that have been settled in Ghana, specifically in Tamale, serve as a mediation between those who have just arrived and also the local population. So this is the chief of the Hausa community explaining to us how recent events in the Sahel are bringing so many that is also causing a lot of conflict and dispute among indigenes and newly arrived. And we can see this is a Fulani family who had left Burkina Faso to come and seek. And they are seeking not to come and sell, but they are coming with their cattle to come and graze the land. The land is already dry, but it's also a form of seeking something better than where they were in Burkina Faso. Illegal mining has become particularly an issue in Ghana, and it's also political. And in Ghana, we call illegal mining galamsey. Galamsey is a term. Whenever you use the term galamsey, everybody knows in Ghana that it's illegal mining. It's very political, and the people involved in galamsey are both local Ghanaians, but also Chinese who come with products such as mercury. And this river is a river in Western Ghana called River Pra. And the color of the river has become orange as a result of illegal mining. And the people around this coastal, this area, which is also close to the coast, cannot fish anymore, and a lot of them have moved on to what we call going on aprodo. So these are some of the fishing communities that have been affected by galamsey and other forms of mercury-induced pollution. So the fishing community going on aprodo leave Accra, Takoradi, and the western regions of Ghana to countries such as Senegal. So there's about 4,000 Ghanaian fishing community in a town in Senegal called Elinkin. Elinkin is in the Casamance region of southern Senegal. And that really tells you that a lot of them had left as a result of what is currently going on. And traditionally, migration from southern Ghana to other countries hasn't been on the go, but recently has become something that we're seeing more and more. And we can see them, they're not just moving alone, but they're moving with their wives. So these are the wives of the fishermen. So you're seeing that going on aprodo is not just going alone, but you go with your family. And it's a form of settlement. And the settlement can be temporary, but it can also be permanent. permanent for a certain period of time. Because for them, permanent can be that you're there for 10 years, 20 years, but when it comes to your retirement, you return home, back to Ghana. So that's the Tema Proto. And this is in Gambia. And the same fishing community are also in Gambia, in a town called Ghana Town. And that tells you the amount of Ghanaians who have settled there, fishing community who have settled there. And the whole area has been named as Ghana Church. You can find that they have their own churches, Ghana Town, they have their own churches, their own schools, etc. It is also a form of settlement. So in La Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan is the capital of the Côte d'Ivoire, and Abidjan, to a lot of Francophone West Africans, see Abidjan as Petit Paris, which is small Paris or little Paris. And it is an El Dorado for them. It has always been an El Dorado because Abidjan, or La Côte d'Ivoire, was far developed in the 80s and 90s when a lot of African countries were experiencing political instability. So the country has always attracted migrants, but many are now using vernaculars such as "On va se chercher dans notre petit Paris." We're going to seek, we're going to look for better life in our small Paris, or système D. Système D means système de débrouillard, meaning system of hustling, you know. And also they use terms such as c'est la guerre, meaning that it's c'est la guerre, in English it's war, but for them it's not war, it's hardship, how they're coping with their hardship and their current situation. And c'est la guerre is also a term for them to help them to be focused on trying to make a living. And also le vendeur de garba. Garba is actually food in Ivory Coast. It's acheke, but the name Garba is actually a name from Niger, a name of a person. But the name of a person has become a name of a food because Garba is no longer a name of a person, but it's a name of a community. So that's also those terms that these Nigerian communities in Abidjan who sell acheke call themselves Garba sellers. And it's also a way of adaptation and a way of integration as well, to be part of the community in the face of displacement. But displacement has also given women agency, and I'll just finish with this. So in a lot.
I'm
Yes?
so sorry to cut you off, but I was just going to say if you could maybe wrap up. We're a little out of time.
Sorry. Okay. All right. So I'll just finish off here, indicating that climate displacement has also helped women to gain their agencies. And these are some of the examples of the women that I spoke to, particularly women from a community in a village from Burkina Faso called Kudugu, where women are the ones who migrate and men stay behind and look after the land and protect the land, which is not normally the case in terms of climate migrations. Usually men and young men who go and women stay behind. So we're seeing that this is new. It's not what we tend to see in migration studies. So yeah, but also these women managed to settle in their new environment through solidarity and networks of women who had already been there before them. So on this note, I think I'll just finish up here since I'm out of time. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jamila. So it's a wonderful panel. What's most interesting, I think, to me is given all the discussion in the earlier part of the day on ongoing forms of uncertainty, these three presentations today focused so much on alternative projects, on future making projects of different sorts. What's also interesting about them is that none of them are very particularly geared towards the state or any particular singular agency or authority. And I think that in some ways is something really interesting to think about. Clearly, especially in the first two presentations, these are not the dominant forms. But I think what's very interesting to think about is then the kinds of possibilities they hold out for us. So in that, just with those brief comments, I have a few questions, but maybe I can add them in between, time permitting. Can I ask or open this up for questions from the audience, and maybe we could cluster them together? Yes.
My question was a little bit of what you just offered for them to share. If some of the speakers could just speak to maybe the opportunity in naming specifically anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial approaches. So some of these projects in their forms take up approach that may share characteristics with that. But just wondering if there's any room or future opportunities, as was mentioned, to explicitly name when and how that's necessary. Specifically, if we're thinking about crises, instability, and the need to name who's causing that, what's causing that. So just wondering if we can share more about any anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist approaches.
Fantastic. And any other questions?
Yeah, my question is, Brianna, first, thank you all for your presentation. Brianna, in your presentation, you gave an example of Atlanta, and I was curious about that, given that the Georgia Black Belt doesn't include Atlanta. And you have so many Black farmers in other rural areas in Georgia. So I was curious about why you selected Atlanta and not any of those other rural areas.
Any other questions?
Well, mine is really a naive question. I'm not sure whether it should even be asked, but I'll ask it and look stupid anyway. I'm fascinated by the two presentations on land and struggles to craft alternative modes of being and relationships to land, at the center of which is the idea that there is a kind of autonomy or autonomous project that can be enacted from land. That is, I would say, foundational to any conception of sovereignty that we have. Territoriality is central to sovereign projects. It has not been clear to me, and I'm really a poor reader, is the question of when land. It seems to me that in all these studies, there's an assumption that land became a commodity and that it is that commodification that is a kind of obstacle to the project of self-realization and self-determination. And so the only way to do that is to undo the relationship with capital. And I'm wondering when that happened. Can we envisage when land became a commodity in the sense of capitalist commodity? And is it possible to envisage today ways of being, having relationships with land that are not in the end entangled with, capital as a kind of meta structure? And the beauty of the projects you are showing here is that in their own small ways, these people are trying to imagine those. The question now is the question of scale. Is the question of how do you scale this small social engineering experiment in a context where everybody, given the panel we just had earlier, they support to think about capitalism and its schizophrenic production of desire. People everywhere, people are desiring good things, and nobody wants to give up on this structure. How do we? It's difficult for me, and that's why I look silly. But I would appreciate if you guys could comment a little bit more on that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we could have a brief round of responses, and if you could keep it as brief as possible so that we could get a few more questions. Who wants to go first?
To answer the simplest question, I'm a member of an organization, and that organization is also part of that project, and that's why I was eager. That's why I was going to specifically. I was there as their guest. They hosted me and showed me around, and that was an access, an ease of access. Although the geography of the Black Belt notwithstanding, and there are a lot of questions of rural communities that have been raised in the last few months. I was also in a rural community in North Carolina a few months ago. That just wasn't what this project was. And I think your questions about the disentanglement of imperialism is interesting because one of the conclusions, or I should say, one of the demands of anti-imperial and like rejecting the imperial mode of living is to break out of the normative cycles of global north. So questioning why you get broccoli all year round. Broccoli does not grow all year round. So if you can go get it, that means that it's being farmed somewhere. Who is farming it? Who's touching it? Getting out of that, the divorce of us from where our food comes from where water comes from, knowing those things and getting your hands ready and planning things. To even go to the other question, can we grow tomatoes? Do we, like, individually in this room, do we know how to grow foods? Could we do that if we needed to do that? And I think the projects are interesting because I specifically chose them for that purpose. And Haiti's difficult because there's a lot of information about Haiti from the perspective of those coming for charity. There's a lot of NGOs that are writing on Haiti. There's a lot of charities and missions that are writing on Haiti. I wanted to hear from people that are in Haiti that weren't that. So that was the big reason why I did that.
Sorry, can you hear me? Now, those are such fantastic questions, and it just got me really thinking about the work that I'm, with the examples and the examples that I presented. I think I'll try to make like two big points here. One, not big, but like broad points here. The first is really to think about the forms of stability that aren't there, that are being addressed in ways with farming on your own land. So if there isn't sort of climatic stability, or there isn't an economic stability in the markets, there isn't financial stability or social stability, is what's bringing, it's harder to identify who is causing the instability than to like identify that these are all the conditions of instability that are being made and what are forms of stability that we can bring to this project. The second big question before scale is time. So for Naz, for example, she just started out, but she also shared with me like how she doesn't know how sustainable this will be in the long term, and she doesn't have help on the ground, or there aren't other people who can also manifest the sort of expertise she is trying to project into the world around permaculture, to use no chemicals, to use no tractors, and to not bring out any of these big machinery and capitalist economies. Are these projects anti-capitalism? It's one thing that I really think about within my work, is because when we think about the land expansion with these plant nurseries, for example, so the growing idea of bringing nature back to the city is often entangled in this commodification of trees and plants that can be always there, whether year-round or they're always there with a certainty. And the biggest thing is to let go of that certainty of something or produce being in the market for a certain time, or your trees always growing on time. And that's why it's a reaction to the capitalist modes of being in the world, but it doesn't necessarily overhaul or create a revolution of being anti-capitalism, but rather than ways of living within those modes, and that you aren't ever explicated. And just as a way to also situate that is like, if she doesn't have enough eggs at her home, she will have to go to the market. What she would emphasize repeatedly is like the self-motivation to craft your own space within, and it's a lifelong project. So for them to do it like part-time is also like, it's really hard. Yeah, that's all.
Jamila?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. Thank you. So the question about colonial and capitalist aspects of displacement and people losing their land. In the case of Ghana, particularly in northern Ghana, we see a strong connection of capitalism, and that is what a lot of the locals indicate, that people coming in, foreigners coming in, both Ghanaians and non-Ghanaians coming in, are coming with capital, are coming with more money than they have, and therefore they are displacing them from their ancestral lands, displacing them from their farmlands, etc. So we can see a strong capitalist approach to appropriation of land, but also we're seeing a huge inequalities, how this brings in inequalities between locals and those who are coming in with much money and much access. And Though on the foreigners are also indicating that in as much as they are coming in, they're also building factories, they're also building warehouses that can employ locals. But there's also this aspect that no, you're building this, but you're also dislocating us. So it's a very murky rapport between locals and indigenes. But we're also seeing in the coastal areas of Ghana that I showed the picture of illegal mining of Chinese and Ghanaians, which is actually polluting river bodies and the sea. Is also we're also seeing the colonial, a new form of neocolonialism that we're seeing in Africa of Chinese coming in, but you know it's also in because African governments are also accepting that, you know, so it's also a very complicated aspect. But there's definitely a case about how we're seeing a new form of neocolonialism linked to new form of migration for just natural resources and how that is also affecting local communities. And local communities are also becoming more and more vocal about that. But how far can they go when government is also in bed with those who are coming in to exploit? You know, so that's also some of the things that I saw both in Ghana, but also in the neighboring countries, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Senegal, etc. So it's quite complex, if I should mention that. It's a combination of a lot of things, complex, but people are struggling to do something about it, you know, and that's what I would answer.
I've been told that we do need to wrap up in 2 minutes. So perhaps what we can do is if there are any more questions, we can just ask the questions and then continue the conversation outside. But are there any more questions? No? Okay, so then if I might take my prerogative as chair then to ask one quick question, and it's not quite a question, but also maybe a reflective comment. And it's really based on, I think, the question that Rogers was asking about the question of scale. So to really ask all three of you, you'll have given us, I think, a sense of alternatives, future making, possibilities. Is it possible also that from these different future making, we need to think about scale differently? And this is something I would ask, because we have a certain idea of this notion of scaling up. Do we need to think about scaling differently, scaling outwards, or in terms of maybe more networks, maybe 1 million small mutinies of different sorts, but that can add up to something very, you know, tremendous? I don't know, but just putting that out there that given the nature of the entire model is different, do we need to think differently about everything? So just to say thank you once again to the wonderful panelists, presenters in the panel. Can we have one more round? And thank you so much to everybody who organized. I don't know if there's any final.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I want to thank all the panelists and the chairs and the staff who have been helping even before the conference and have been here today. So we'll continue tomorrow. At the end of the conference tomorrow, we are hoping to have some reflections about, what to do next. If people are interested in, book volume or, special issues or whatnot. So you can begin to reflect on that if you are interested in that. And so we would like to know what people are interested in, because you don't make assumptions. But very interesting experiences where people will be like, I can't wait to contribute to a book. And once they leave and you email them, it's like, you never hear back. So we'll see if we have, sufficient number of people who are interested in moving forward to see what we can do. But I'm sure you agree with me that the panels today have been fantastic. The very stimulating discussions, in the panel and among the members of the audience. So again, let's give a round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you very much. See you. Please, we are starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Our colleague, Provost Wanchad, will be giving the first talk, which is a very brief talk, but you can't afford to miss it. So see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.